A flight attendant held a black CEO's teen at knife point in a fit of rage, but moments later, the blade ended up buried in his own heart instead. He pressed a knife to a teen's throat, using him as a hostage to fuel his hatred of a black CEO. Subscribe if you believe no uniform is above the law. The tension started the moment Silas Dunbar stepped into the cabin. He wasn't expecting a red carpet. He never did. Despite being a billionaire CEO with global reach, Silas knew that success didn't shield you from bias. It often made you a target. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that fit his tall frame like armor, Silas moved with calm authority, one hand gripping his briefcase, the other resting gently on his son Malik's shoulder. The soft carpet of the first-class aisle muffled their steps, the overhead lights casting a golden hue on the polished surfaces. "Good evening," Silas said with quiet warmth as they reached the galley. The flight attendant stationed there, white, mid-40s, face sharp with age but no kindness, barely looked up. A cold smirk flickered across his lips. He muttered something under his breath. Silas heard it. "Figures." The word was like a pin dropped in still water, barely audible, but it rippled. Silas paused. He didn't ask for clarity. He didn't confront. He just met the man's eyes, gray, flat, unreadable, and nodded politely. There were battles worth picking, and then there were moments best stored for later. He guided Malik to their seats, 1A and 1B, window and aisle. The cabin was quiet, elegant. Cream-colored leather seats, gold-toned reading lights, soft piano music faintly playing over the intercom. Outside, the city lights of Graymore faded as the plane began taxiing. Malik, dressed in a charcoal hoodie and crisp black jeans, sat wide-eyed beside him. He pulled out his sketchbook and headphones. Music clicked on. Pencil touched paper. Silas leaned back, watching him. "First time in first class, huh?" he asked. Malik smiled, shy but proud. "I didn't think it'd be this quiet. It's like a hotel in the sky." Silas smiled, his heart softening. "Enjoy it. You earned this. Straight A's. That's not easy. I just wanted to come with you. I don't care about the conference." "I know," Silas said, brushing a hand over his son's curls. "But I want you to see what I do. The rooms I walk into. So, one day, when it's your turn, you won't hesitate to take your seat at the table." Their voices faded into the hum of the engines. The plane lifted into the dark. Silas felt something rare. Peace. Until he looked back toward the galley. The same flight attendant, his name tag read Lorne Calder, stood by the curtain, glaring. Not scanning tickets, not checking compartments, just watching. Silas narrowed his eyes slightly. Lorne's expression shifted to indifference as soon as their gazes met, and he disappeared behind the curtain. Silas's instincts stirred. He had built Veltronics from nothing, had navigated betrayals, espionage, hostile boardrooms. He trusted patterns. And something about Lorne Calder felt off. Too quiet, too still, too personal. But he said nothing. Not yet. An hour passed. Cabin lights dimmed. Passengers relaxed. A steward rolled by with a beverage cart. When he reached Silas, Silas asked, "Will the meals be served soon?" The man nodded. "Just a few minutes, sir." But it wasn't him who returned. Lorne Calder appeared 10 minutes later, empty-handed. He walked directly to Silas and Malik, crouched slightly and with a mocking smile said, "You people always think you're entitled to everything." The words dropped like thunder in the soft hum of the cabin. Silas froze. Malik's pencil slipped from his fingers. A man across the aisle looked over, brow furrowed. Silas's jaw clenched. He leaned in, eyes sharp but voice calm. "We'll be filing a report after we land." Lorne's smile vanished. He stood straight, his nostrils flaring, fists tightening at his sides. For a second, it seemed like he would say something more, but then he turned and walked away. Silas exhaled slowly, forcing his heart to settle. He could feel Malik's eyes on him. "You okay?" his son asked softly. "I'm fine," Silas replied, "but something's wrong with him. Don't talk to him unless I'm with you." Malik nodded, his face tight with concern. Silas pulled out his tablet, trying to focus on his speech notes for the conference in Ridgeland. But the words swam on the screen. His mind kept circling back to that look, that voice, that "you people." He glanced over at Malik again. His son had resumed sketching, but his pencil moved slower now, more hesitant. Silas knew men like Lorne. Not just angry. Calculating. The kind who buried rage under formality, waiting for the right moment to strike where it hurt most. He tapped the flight attendant call button. Another steward came, not Lorne. "I'd like a log of crew member names for this flight, please," Silas said. The steward blinked. "Is there a problem, sir?" Silas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not yet. As the steward walked away, Silas sank back into his seat, one arm over Malik's shoulder. Outside the window, clouds stretched endlessly beneath them. Inside the cabin, the quiet settled again. But this time, it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that came before the storm. And somewhere near the galley, Lorne Calder watched and waited, his eyes flickering with something that had nothing to do with customer service. Sometimes, a smile hides a plan sharper than a knife. The delay in food service had been long enough to make passengers restless. Trays hadn't been distributed, lights dimmed, and even the soft clink of cutlery, a usual comfort in first class, was missing. Silas Dunbar, ever composed, leaned toward the call button and pressed it gently. He didn't expect a dramatic reaction, just a courteous explanation. What he received instead felt like the first crack in something far more dangerous. Lorne Calder emerged from the galley with rigid shoulders and a forced smile that didn't touch his eyes. He approached Silas's row with deliberate slowness, each footstep clicking against the cabin floor like a clock counting down. Silas gave him a respectful nod and asked calmly, "Is there an update on the meals?" It's been a while. Lorne's smile remained, but his jaw twitched. "We're working on it," he replied flatly. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked off. Silas raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Malik, seated next to him with headphones around his neck, glanced up from his sketch pad. "He didn't like that," the boy muttered. Silas offered a small, reassuring smile. "It's fine." Probably just a long night. But it wasn't fine. A few minutes later, Lorne returned, not with a tray, not with a menu, but with venom disguised as politeness. He leaned slightly forward, and with a tight grin that stretched too far across his face, he said loud enough for half the cabin to hear, "You people always think you're entitled to everything." The words didn't echo, but they thundered. Silas's breath caught mid-inhale. Malik froze, his pencil slipping from his fingers. The woman 2 rows ahead stiffened in her seat, uncertain if she had just misheard. A man across the aisle glanced up from his tablet. Even the soft hum of the engine felt like it lowered in response. Silas didn't blink. His mind raced, not in panic, but in calculation. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered prejudice, but rarely had it come wrapped in a flight attendant's uniform and delivered so boldly. He sat forward slightly, keeping his voice low and composed. "We'll be filing a report after we land," he said evenly. That was the moment it happened. The change. Lorne's grin collapsed, replaced by a flicker of something darker. His eyes, once narrowed in mockery, now twitched with something closer to fear. Or fury. Maybe both. "You're not reporting anything," Lorne muttered as he turned on his heel. Silas's eyes narrowed. He watched the man disappear back into the galley, the edge of the curtain snapping shut behind him. He felt it in his gut. A tightening. A shift in the air. The temperature hadn't changed, but something colder now lived in the cabin. Malik reached down to pick up his pencil, but paused. "Did you hear what he said?" the boy asked quietly. "I did," Silas replied, his voice low. He glanced around, noting the uncertain stares from passengers trying to pretend they weren't watching. No one had spoken up. No one had intervened. Silence, sometimes loudest when it's needed least. Silas placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "Stay close to me." "Don't leave your seat unless I say, 'Is he dangerous?'" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Silas didn't answer right away. His mind went to the company he'd built, the enemies he'd made, the precautions he always took but hoped he'd never need. Then he looked his son in the eye. "I don't think he's finished." In the galley, behind that thin blue curtain, Lorne Calder stood still. His hands gripped the edge of the counter until his knuckles turned white. He stared down at the meal trays he hadn't served. His heart beat like a war drum. He could still hear Silas's voice, calm, sure, unshaken, the kind of voice people listened to, the kind of man people followed. And he hated it. Lorne's whole career had been built on playing the part. "Yes, sir. No, ma'am. Welcome aboard. Thank you for flying." He smiled when he wanted to scream, bowed when he wanted to stand tall, But no one had ever clapped when he entered a room. No one had ever remembered his name. And now, this man, this perfect, polished man with his perfect son, was going to file a report. He imagined the email chains, the supervisors whispering, the investigations. "You're not reporting anything," he repeated under his breath, his voice trembling now with something unstable. He turned toward the supply cabinet and opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the contents, not for food, but for something else. A misplaced utensil, an unused tool, something with an edge. He closed the door just as gently. Back in row 2A, Silas remained alert. He reached down to his bag, not out of paranoia, but preparation. Inside was his encrypted phone, a private channel for executive security. He didn't use it, not yet, but the thought lingered. He glanced again toward the curtain. It moved slightly, but no one came through. The engines droned on. The cabin lights dimmed for night mode. A flight attendant's voice announced upcoming turbulence. Passengers adjusted their blankets and settled in. But Silas didn't move. He sat still, mind calculating, because something inside him twisted too. This wasn't over. It had just begun. A scream cut through the cabin like a blade through fabric, sharp, sudden, and shattering. Passengers jolted upright, startled from their sleep, their heads swiveling toward the sound. The overhead lights buzzed quietly, casting a sterile glow across the cabin. But all light seemed to dim the moment they saw what had happened. Lorne Calder stood halfway down the aisle, his hand clenched tightly around Malik Dunbar's arm, the boy's slim body pulled flush against him. In Lorne's other hand was a gleaming, narrow-bladed knife, its tip pressed directly beneath Malik's jawline. The steel trembled ever so slightly from the aircraft's motion, but Lorne's grip was steady, unnervingly so. Silas was already on his feet, breath ripped from his lungs. "Malik!" he shouted, his voice loud enough to echo through the stunned silence. Malik's sketchbook lay abandoned on the seat, a pencil still rolling slowly down the tray table. The peaceful child who had been drawing minutes ago was now caught in the arms of a man consumed by rage. "Don't move," Lorne barked, his voice loud, cracking with menace. "Anyone steps forward and I slit his throat right here." His eyes were wild, bloodshot, but his stance was controlled. Too controlled. This wasn't panic. This was calculated fury. Silas's heart pounded as he took a small step forward. The oxygen in the cabin felt thinner. The walls felt closer. His instincts screamed to act, to charge, to rip his son free from that monster's arms, but he knew better. One wrong move could end his son's life. "Let him go," Silas said, voice trembling but firm. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, showing he held no threat. "Lorne, listen to me." "This doesn't have to go any further," Lorne sneered. "You think you can talk me down?" His mouth curled into something that was not quite a smile. "You think your money, your name, that suit, any of it matters now?" Passengers whispered prayers behind Silas. Some sobbed softly. A few tried to raise their phones, but quickly froze when Lorne barked, "Put that down!" The blade glinted as he adjusted his grip on Malik, who whimpered, barely able to move. A thin line of red had already formed on his neck, shallow but terrifying. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with tears, but not just from fear. He was trying to be brave. Silas saw it, the way Malik held himself still, the way he swallowed back panic. It broke his heart. "I'm right here, son." "I'm not going anywhere," Silas whispered, but Lorne tugged Malik back another step, moving toward the galley. "You think I care who you are?" he snapped. "You walk onto this plane with your polished shoes, your perfect son, and the world smiles for you. People clap when you walk on stage. You get medals. You get headlines." Silas didn't answer. He couldn't. He was listening, trying to find the pattern, the pain. Understanding it might be the only way to end this without blood. Lorne's voice grew darker. "You know how many years I've worn this uniform? How many flights I've worked? You think anyone ever thanked me? You think they see me when I pour their coffee?" Silas kept his voice low, measured. "I see you now, Lorne." That struck something. Lorne's eyes narrowed. "No, you don't. You see what you always see. Some angry man with issues? Some low-wage worker who snapped? That's the story, isn't it? That's the headline waiting to be written." Behind Silas, a passenger began to rise. Lorne's head snapped sideways. "Sit down," he roared. The man froze mid-motion and dropped back into his seat, trembling. Silas took a careful step forward. "This isn't who you are." Lorne gave a bitter laugh. "You don't know me." "I'm trying to," Silas replied. His mind was spinning through scenarios. If he rushed forward, Malik would be the first to suffer. If he stayed still, Lorne could reach the galley, possibly lock himself in, or worse. Either way, the time to act was shrinking. The plane felt smaller by the second. Malik made a small noise, a tight exhale of fear. His knees buckled slightly, but Lorne hoisted him up, locking his elbow around the boy's throat. "You think money protects you," Lorne shouted, his voice no longer calm but trembling with rage. "You think it buys you safety, even here, 30,000 feet up?" Silas clenched his fists. His jaw tightened. "No," he said, "but I know what it means to fight for someone you love. And I will not stop fighting for my son." The two men stared at each other. Between them stood fear, memory, and the blade of a knife. "Back off," Lorne shouted again, taking another step toward the rear galley. The tension in the cabin stretched thin, taut like a wire about to snap. Every breath felt louder, every blink slower. The passengers didn't speak. They didn't move. They just watched as one man held a child hostage and another tried to hold the world steady. "You think money protects you?" Lorne growled, dragging Malik toward the galley. "I'll show you what power really means." The scream tore through the cabin like a siren, freezing every breath, every prayer, every movement. Passengers gasped, twisting in their seats to see what had happened. In the aisle, near row 7, Lorne Calder stood with one arm locked around Malik Dunbar's chest, the other hand pressing a sharp, narrow blade against the boy's throat. Malik's face was pale, eyes wide with panic, his hands clawing slightly at Lorne's forearm. A thin red line shimmered across his skin where the blade kissed him. Silas Dunbar's world narrowed to that single point. He surged out of his seat, his legs moving before his mind could catch up. The air felt thick, every step like moving through water. Passengers shrank into their seats, pulling children close, whispering frantic prayers. A man near the emergency exit looked like he might stand, but a glance from Lorne, wild-eyed, sweat gathering on his brow, froze him in place. Silas raised both hands as he approached, voice low but firm. "Lorne, I'm right here," he said, stepping slowly down the aisle. "Let my son go." "This is between us." Lorne's jaw clenched, the muscles in his forearms tightening as he pulled Malik tighter. The blade pressed deeper, drawing a drop of blood that beaded and slid down the boy's neck. Malik whimpered, but didn't struggle. Silas's heart cracked. His son was trying to be brave. "You've had everything," Lorne spat, not moving his eyes from Silas. "Everything I wanted. Promotions. Respect. A seat at the top." Silas stopped a few feet away. "You think I didn't work for it?" he asked softly. "You think it was handed to me?" "I worked 20 years, Lorne barked, his voice raw with fury. "I cleaned cabins. I served suits. No one clapped when I walked in a room. But you, suits, smiles, speeches. People listen when you speak. They cheer for you." The knife twitched, the steel glinting beneath the cabin lights. Silas kept his hand steady, his voice calm. "I'm not your enemy, Lorne," he said. "This isn't how you fix it." Lorne's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You don't get it." "You never will." "I do," Silas replied, his voice dipping to a lower, more intimate tone. "I know what it's like to feel overlooked. To be told no 100 times for one yes. But this, hurting him, won't make them see you. It'll destroy you." For the first time, Lorne's gaze wavered. A flicker of uncertainty passed through his eyes, like a shadow across a storm cloud. His grip didn't loosen, but his breathing changed, faster, less sure. Behind Silas, a flight attendant sobbed quietly. Somewhere in the rear, a child whimpered. The cabin had become a tomb of fear. Silas took a small step closer, careful not to trigger a reaction. "Let him go, and you and I can talk. No cameras, no passengers, just us. But you have to release him." Lorne's knuckles whitened around the knife handle. His eyes darted toward the galley. And that's when it happened. A low rumble rolled through the floor as the aircraft hit turbulence. The plane jolted sharply, knocking drink cups off tray tables. A chorus of gasps rose. The sudden movement sent Lorne stumbling half a step to the side. His grip wavered. Malik cried out as the blade nicked deeper. Silas's instinct was to rush forward, but he froze. One wrong move, and everything could spiral. He had to stay measured. Malik's breath hitched, his small body trembling. Silas's own breath caught in his throat. Then, just past Lorne's shoulder, the edge of the galley curtain stirred. It was subtle, a whisper of movement, as if brushed by a draft. But Silas saw it. Someone was back there, watching, moving, waiting. A passenger, another crew member. Whoever it was, they hadn't stepped forward yet. But they were there, and they were waiting for the right moment. Silas held Lorne's gaze, raising his voice slightly to draw attention away from the galley. "You don't want to be invisible anymore," he said. "You want to matter." "I see that. I see you." Lorne blinked, sweat dripping down the side of his face. His breathing was ragged now. "You said you've worked 20 years, Silas continued. "Then you know this isn't the way. Let him go, and I swear I will make sure your voice is heard. I will speak for you." "Lies," Lorne muttered. But his voice was thinner now. His grip was trembling. Another slight shift behind the curtain. Silas's eyes didn't move, but his mind registered it. Whoever was there was getting ready, preparing to strike. He had to keep Lorne distracted. "You said no one clapped for you," Silas said, his voice steady, deliberate. "But what if that wasn't your fault? What if it was theirs?" Lorne swallowed hard. His lips quivered. Silas took another breath. Just a few more seconds. Behind Lorne, the curtain moved again, slightly more this time. Silas didn't dare give it away. "Every second counts," Silas whispered under his breath. "And someone's about to make their move." Lorne stumbled. The moment was brief, barely a heartbeat, but it was enough. From behind the narrow slit in the galley curtain, Elias Grant moved. The tension in his shoulders released like a spring-loaded wire, coiled for too long. His right foot drove forward first, silent and precise, followed by a forceful push from his left leg as he lunged into the aisle. The curtain snapped aside like a broken seal. For a flash, all movement in the cabin stopped. The startled gasps of passengers, the drone of engines. Even Silas Dunbar's voice cut mid-sentence. Lorne Calder turned too late. Elias's shoulder slammed into Lorne's ribcage with a crushing thud. The sound was muted but unmistakable. Bone against bone. Meat against pressure. Lorne's breath exploded from his lungs in a grunt and his balance faltered. Malik jerked violently in his grip and the knife quivered near his neck, a thread of blood already drawn. Silas screamed, "Malik!" But the air marshal didn't hear him. All his focus had narrowed to one objective: separate the knife from the hostage without causing death. His training flooded his muscles, combat geometry, leverage angles, momentum curves. But the knife didn't fall. Lorne's grip was too tight, desperation giving him unnatural strength. The stumble had disoriented him, but not broken him. Now the real danger began. Lorne twisted his body sharply to the right, dragging Malik with him, almost knocking over the beverage cart still wedged beside the galley. The boy cried out again, voice cracking with terror. The cut on his neck deepened, just a shallow streak of red now turning wet and bright. Elias cursed inwardly. Too close. Much too close. "Back up!" Lorne shrieked, his voice cracking like shattered glass. "I swear, I'll open the door. You hear me?" His free hand slammed against the emergency exit handle just beyond the galley partition. It was a bluff. Elias knew it. Doors like that didn't open mid-flight, not at cruising altitude. But Lorne didn't seem to know that. Or worse, he didn't care. "You can't open that," Elias said, stepping carefully to his left, shifting the angle. "We're at 35,000 feet. The pressure won't let it budge." Lorne blinked, uncertain. His hand lingered on the door handle. His face flickered, first with panic, then confusion, then something more dangerous. Anger. "Liar," he spat. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know how things work?" He pulled Malik tighter. The boy's face was pale now. Eyes wide, sweat trailing down the side of his temple. His breathing was shallow, lips trembling. Silas took a step forward. "Lorne," he said, voice low, calm, but edged with steel, "don't do this. You don't want to hurt him. You just want to be seen." "I see you. Don't!" Lorne barked, spinning half around to face Silas. The knife wavered again. Elias saw his opening vanish. He couldn't move without risking Malik. The boy's throat was practically resting against the blade. But Silas didn't flinch. He stood in the middle of the aisle, hands open at his sides, feet planted like he owned the ground beneath them. And maybe he did. He wasn't just a billionaire or a CEO. Right now, Silas Dunbar was just a father trying to reach his son. "I'm right here," Silas said, taking another step. "Take me instead." Lorne's eyes flared. "Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? Playing the noble hero. Let me guess, people clap when you land? Shake your hand in airports? I've watched men like you walk into rooms I wasn't allowed to breathe in." "No one's clapping now," Silas replied, his voice tight. "No one's watching. Just you and me. So do it. Let him go." Lorne's breathing accelerated. His grip on the knife shifted slightly, sweat pooling under his fingers. Elias noted the subtle repositioning. A poor grip. Tension in the wrist. If it slipped, Malik whimpered, his legs shaking now. "Dad," he croaked. Silas's face cracked for a moment, the mask slipping. Pain flickered behind his eyes. He raised a trembling hand. "It's okay, son." "I'm right here." Elias's left hand hovered over the compact service pistol beneath his jacket, but he couldn't draw. Not yet. Not with Malik that close. He whispered into the small mic clipped near his collar. "Cabin, do it again. Bank left." Sharper A pause, then, "Confirmed." Banking now. The plane tilted again, this time more forcefully. Passengers gasped, overhead bins rattled, a bottle rolled down the aisle. Lorne lost footing just for a split second. He staggered sideways. Elias moved again, but checked himself. It wasn't enough. The moment had passed too fast. Lorne recovered, slamming his back against the side panel, pulling Malik into the narrow alcove beside the lavatory door. There was no clean shot, no clean path. Elias's chest heaved. He needed something else. Anything. A new variable. And then it came, unexpectedly, from the boy himself. Malik turned his face toward Lorne and spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're wrong." Lorne blinked. "What?" "My dad doesn't bury people," Malik said, eyes locked on his captor with quiet defiance. "He builds them." For a moment, Lorne faltered. His arm didn't drop, but it shook. Elias saw it. Silas saw it. The moment held, stretched by a thread, and then came the whisper of thought that shattered the air. "But sometimes," Malik added, breath unsteady, "bricks are used to build graves, too." Lorne's eyes widened. A flicker of fear or realization passed through them. The storm was about to break. In war, timing separates survival from tragedy. Elias lunged forward, crashing through the curtain like a storm breaking through silence. His momentum was brutal and precise. His knee smashed into Lorne's ribs, and the force sent the flight attendant stumbling back several steps. Passengers screamed, trays rattled, but Lorne's grip on Malik never loosened. The blade in his hand remained pressed against the boy's neck, sharper now, more dangerous than before. A thin line of blood ran down Malik's skin, glinting under the cold overhead lights. Silas's voice tore through the chaos. "Malik!" he shouted, panic tightening every syllable. The father's hands were frozen mid-reach, his body caught between the desperate urge to protect and the brutal knowledge that one wrong move could end everything. Lorne dragged Malik toward the emergency galley door, his face pale and twisted with something far more dangerous than fear. It was fury and despair, the kind of madness that didn't care about consequence, the kind that burned bridges just to feel the fire. "One step closer," Lorne roared, pressing the blade harder against Malik's neck, "and I open it. I swear I'll do it." His arm trembled, not with weakness but with the electric charge of someone teetering on the edge. Elias stopped cold. His chest heaved from the sprint, his muscles tight with tension. He extended both hands in front of him, palms up in surrender, his voice calm but firm. "That door won't open, Lorne. Not at this altitude. We're at 35,000 feet. The pressure won't let it." Lorne blinked, his eyes flicking to the door's handle. He hesitated. Elias saw it. So did Silas. That flicker of doubt, that split-second lapse in certainty. Silas's mind moved fast. He doesn't know, he thought, and in that realization he saw opportunity, not for violence, but for control. "Lorne," Elias continued, his tone shifting slightly, softening as if speaking to a wounded animal, "you've got one chance to walk off this plane alive. Let the boy go. Put down the knife. We can talk." But Lorne didn't listen. Or maybe he did, but the voice in his head was louder. He laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp, jagged, laughter made from broken pieces. "Alive?" he repeated, his grip tightening as Malik winced in pain. You think I care about that now? His eyes darted from Elias to Silas and back again. I lost everything, he muttered, voice cracking. My job is a uniform, nothing more. My life is invisible. And you? He pointed the blade slightly toward Silas, keeping Malik close. You all already buried me. With your success. With your money. With your spotlight, Silas took a careful step forward, heart pounding, palms sweating. Then talk to me, he said, his voice even. You want to be seen. I see you, right now. But if you hurt my son, no one will remember your name for anything except pain. Lorne's breath came in short gasps. His hands shook, not from fear, but the weight of being seen for the first time, too late to know what to do with it. And then, through the tight silence, another voice rose. You're wrong. It was Malik. His voice was soft, barely audible over the hum of the engine and the whispers of fear clinging to the cabin walls. But it cut through everything. You're wrong, Malik repeated, his eyes locked on Lorne's. His cheeks were wet, his body shaking, but his voice held firm. My dad doesn't bury people, he builds them. The words struck Lorne like a slap. He froze, eyes wide, breath caught. His grip didn't loosen, but it wavered. Silas felt the shift in the air, the pull of something fragile and about to change. Elias straightened slightly, watching closely, waiting for his chance. For a moment, time didn't move. It just held its breath. Lorne blinked rapidly, lips twitching as if caught between shouting and silence. His face twisted, something between rage and recognition. He stared at Malik as though seeing him for the first time, not as a hostage, but as a boy, a son. Then he whispered, not to Elias, not to Silas, but to himself. But sometimes, bricks are used to build graves too. Lorne flinched, caught off guard by Malik's quiet but powerful words. In that heartbeat of hesitation, Elias moved, fast, trained, precise. He lunged from behind the galley curtain with his body low, hoping to get under Lorne's reach. But the flight attendant had been expecting something. He jerked Malik backward with a snarl, dragging the boy like a shield, the blade slicing deeper across Malik's collarbone. A line of blood bloomed across the fabric of the boy's shirt. Next one's fatal, Lorne shouted, eyes wild, his voice cracking under pressure. Passengers gasped. Some cried out. The ones who had started to peek up now shrank back into their seats. Others fumbled for phones, trying to record without being seen. The silence after the scream was louder than the scream itself. Silas stood frozen for a split second, the sound of his son's pained breathing stabbing him harder than any knife ever could. His fingers twitched helplessly by his side, knuckles white with restraint. Lorne's face was pale and damp with sweat. His pupils darted between Elias, Silas, and the rows of silent, terrified witnesses. He was cornered, and he knew it, but that only made him more dangerous. His grip on Malik was now desperate, less controlled, the tip of the blade shaking slightly as it hovered near the boy's throat. Back off, Lorne barked, his voice high and trembling. You don't get to take this from me. Not again. Silas took a half-step forward, hands raised. You don't have to do this. There's still a way out, Lorne. Just listen. But Lorne wasn't listening. He was spiraling. The tension was at a breaking point. That's when it happened. From the second row, seat 2C, a tall, broad-shouldered man slowly stood up. His movements were deliberate, calm. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He simply raised both hands where everyone could see them. Mr. Dunbar, the man said, voice deep and steady, should I intervene? Silas turned, confused. The man was familiar, but not in any obvious way. He wasn't a business associate, not someone Silas had greeted before takeoff. The man's eyes met his with a calm intensity, alert, focused, and oddly reassuring. Who are you? Silas asked, his voice hoarse. In response, the man reached down slowly and pulled back the edge of his coat. On his belt was a slim, matte black badge holder. Inside gleamed a silver emblem embossed with the words, Internal Protection Division, Dunbar, Private Marshals. The realization hit Silas like a lightning bolt. You're one of mine, he whispered. The man gave a firm nod. Reddick Cole, assigned to monitor threats against your family, ordered to remain invisible unless that danger became imminent. That time, he said, his eyes flicking to Malik's bloodied shirt and Lorne's trembling knife hand, is now. For a moment, Silas forgot to breathe. He had authorized this level of protection himself years ago, after a kidnapping threat had surfaced during a government contract. The team had been quietly active ever since. Silent shadows in airports, ghosts in crowds. This one had been seated only a few feet away, hidden in plain sight. Across the aisle, Elias caught Reddick's eyes. A quick nod passed between them. No words, no gestures, just understanding. Lorne noticed the exchange. His grip on Malik tightened again. "No one move," he shouted, swinging the blade in a trembling arc toward Elias and Reddick. "I will end this. Don't test me." But the panic in his voice betrayed him. He was unraveling. Reddick didn't blink. He spoke softly into a throat mic clipped beneath his collar. "Code Apex. Target has hostage. Flanking left and right. Stand by from the cockpit." Nothing but static in reply, but Reddick knew the captain had heard. Silas remained in the center aisle, hands still raised. His heart pounded, but his mind moved like machinery, calculating, tracking every breath, every twitch of the blade. "Lorne," he said firmly, "you said you were invisible." "I see you now. I see all of it." Lorne's eyes widened for a second, hope or fear. It was hard to tell. "You don't know what that's like," he hissed. "I do," Silas said. "I've been underestimated my whole life, but hurting my son won't fix what they did to you. This isn't the way to be seen." The words landed like bricks on water, sinking, but visible. Elias slowly began to shift weight onto his back foot. Reddick did the same on the opposite side. Malik whimpered again. Blood now soaked the top of his chest, but his eyes were open, terrified, watching his father, watching the man with the knife. Reddick whispered into the mic again. "Redirect. Await signal." Silas's voice grew louder, more commanding. "Let go of the knife, Lorne. I swear I will speak for you. I will make sure your voice is heard. But you need to let go." Right now, Lorne's hand twitched, his face contorted. "I wanted to be someone," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I wanted to matter." He pulled Malik even closer, the blade nearly pressing into the boy's neck. And then Malik moved. With what little strength he had, he lifted his foot and stomped down hard on Lorne's instep. Lorne howled in pain. That was the mark. Reddick launched forward with blinding speed, clearing the aisle in a single leap. And in that moment, the world held its breath. When you corner a lion, beware the hunters you didn't see coming. He thought threatening a child mid-flight would go unanswered, but justice doesn't stay silent. If you believe every act of cruelty must be answered, hit subscribe. Justice starts here. Lorne's fingers clenched tighter around the knife as the tremble in his hand betrayed a storm brewing beneath the surface. His jaw was rigid, sweat gathering at his temples. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, casting harsh shadows across the cramped cabin, making every motion feel sharper, every breath louder. Malik's shirt was stained deep red now, the blood creeping down in a slow, terrifying spread. The boy swayed slightly in Lorne's grasp, his face pale, his body going limp with fear and pain. His breaths were shallow, quick, barely holding on. Across the aisle, Silas Dunbar stepped forward. No longer just a father, he was a negotiator balancing between fury and control. His suit was rumpled, his expression carved from steel, but his voice was calm, steady. "You said you were invisible," Silas said, his tone deliberate, eyes never leaving Lorne. "I see you now, Lorne. You want recognition? This isn't the way. Let go of the knife and I swear I'll speak for you. Let go now." Lorne's eyes narrowed. He shifted his weight, edging toward the galley wall with Malik still pulled tight against him like a human shield. "You don't get it," Lorne whispered. "I wanted to be someone." His voice cracked like a fault line under pressure. No one moved. Passengers held their breath, standing back but ready, clearing the aisle without being told. The silence was suffocating. On either side of Lorne, shadows crept closer. Reddick Cole advanced from the right, tall, deliberate, his muscular frame tense beneath his dark jacket. To the left, Elias Grant was silent as smoke, waiting for the signal. Both men kept their hands low, their movements calculated, rehearsed in darker corners of the world. Between them, Silas stayed front and center, still speaking, still pulling Lorne's attention away from everything else. "You think I haven't been overlooked?" Silas continued, his voice barely above a whisper now, meant only for Lorne. "You think people didn't doubt me every step of the way?" I didn't get here because I was handed anything. I got here because I never let hate decide my next move." Lorne blinked, his face twitching. There was a flash of something. Confusion, maybe regret, but it passed like a gust. The knife hovered dangerously near Malik's neck. Behind his earpiece, Reddick murmured into a secure channel, "Engage on my mark." Redirect his focus. Silas caught the faint signal in Reddick's eye and nodded ever so slightly. His voice rose again. "Lorne, listen to me. Letting go now is not failure. It's courage. Don't do something you can't take back." Lorne's grip on Malik tightened again. "No," he growled. "It's too late." And then Malik moved. With all the strength left in his failing body, the boy brought his heel down hard on Lorne's foot. A crunch echoed faintly, bone or tendon, no one could tell, but the effect was immediate. Lorne screamed. That was the mark. Reddick surged forward like a storm breaking a dam, his entire body a weapon. His boot pounded the floor with force, momentum building in a single, devastating arc. Time slowed. The tension snapped like a taut rope, and in that suspended moment, one heartbeat, maybe two, Lorne's world shifted. Malik dropped slightly from Lorne's slackened hold, the knife wobbling in the air as Lorne's hand jerked reflexively from the pain. Silas lunged instinctively but stopped. This wasn't his moment. Reddick's body blurred forward, arms outstretched, his weight perfectly balanced as he prepared to make contact. Behind Lorne, Elias began his own move, circling just enough to flank the galley. The passengers gasped in unison. A few wept openly. Someone dropped their phone. Another muttered a prayer. Lorne was off balance now, reeling, not just from pain, but from something deeper. Shame, exposure, collapse. Reddick's voice was low but final as he moved in. When the blade draws blood, the tide of power shifts. Reddick moved first. Like a battering ram wrapped in muscle and precision, he slammed forward, his full weight colliding with Lorne just as the blade hovered perilously close to Malik's throat. His right arm snapped outward, locking tight around Lorne's wrist, twisting with a practiced force that made bones grind and nerves scream. At the same instant, Elias swept in from the side, a blur of control and speed. His hands gripped Malik, pulling the boy free in a single, fluid motion. Malik's body hit Silas's chest with a soft thud. Trembling, bleeding, alive. Silas collapsed to his knees with the weight of his son, wrapping both arms around the boy's shoulders. Malik buried his face into his father's suit, breath shallow and shaky, blood seeping into the fabric. Silas whispered his name once, voice cracked and raw, but there was no time for comfort, not yet. Around them, the cabin had gone breathless. Every passenger was frozen in place, watching the storm unfold between the galley and the narrow aisle. Some had their hands over their mouths. Others were quietly filming, their screens trembling with the rhythm of their fear. Even the hum of the engines felt muted beneath the tension that gripped the cabin like a fist. Reddick still held Lorne's arm, now driving it backward into the wall with each surge of strength. But Lorne wouldn't go down quietly. With a sudden twist, he threw his weight sideways and broke free of the partial hold. His elbow came up, catching Reddick just under the chin, enough to stagger him back a step. Then came the frenzy. Lorne slashed upward in a wide arc, the blade catching Reddick's shoulder. The fabric tore. Blood bloomed. But Reddick didn't flinch. Instead, he gritted his teeth and turned with precision, catching Lorne's wrist mid-swing. He twisted, hard. There was a sickening crack. The knife flew from Lorne's hand and skittered across the floor, landing near a passenger's foot. A wave of relief swept the cabin, too soon. Without the knife, Lorne didn't hesitate. He lunged, his body colliding with Elias and driving him backward into the galley's stainless steel counter. The impact echoed like thunder through the cabin. Dishes clattered to the floor. Elias grunted, his back slamming against a row of drawers, hands trying to deflect Lorne's attack. The two men grappled viciously, tight, breathless, and close. There was no space for wide swings or shouts, only grunts and the sounds of fists hitting flesh. Then Lorne's hand found it. A metal skewer, used for fruit trays or sandwich platters, rested in a utensil bin behind Elias's shoulder. It was slim, sharp, and lethal in the wrong hands. Lorne grabbed it without hesitation. His fingers wrapped around the steel. He raised it. Silas saw it all unfold in a second that stretched into eternity. He had just set Malik down into the nearest seat, whispering promises that everything was okay, even when he wasn't sure it was. But now, instinct took over. Silas surged forward, boots slamming against the carpeted aisle. His hand reached out not with calculation, but with fire. Lorne, still atop Elias, was seconds away from driving the skewer downward. His face twisted into something almost inhuman. Rage, desperation, something rotten and final. Silas reached him. His hand clamped onto Lorne's wrist. Their eyes met. There was no exchange of words, just the sound of ragged breathing, just the weight of every decision, every injustice, every scar that had led to this moment. And then Silas moved. With all the force in his body, with every ounce of strength that came not from his muscles but from his fatherhood, his fury, his unbreakable will, Silas twisted the skewer free and drove it upward into Lorne's chest. The motion was smooth, controlled, surgical. Lorne gasped, eyes going wide in disbelief. His mouth opened, but no sound came. His body went still, knees buckling. He looked down as if the weapon had appeared from nowhere, like some betrayal of the laws he thought he could bend. He collapsed. The body hit the floor with a heavy thud, the steel still embedded where Silas had planted it. Elias rolled away, panting, his hands smeared with blood, some of it his own, most of it not. Passengers screamed softly, some crying, others frozen. One man dropped his phone. Malik, still clutching the armrest, looked up just in time to see his father standing there, hand shaking, eyes blazing, the weight of the moment heavy on his frame. Silas didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every soul on that plane now understood what it meant to fight for your child with everything you had. And as silence fell once again, the final words echoed in the air like a verdict handed down from fate itself. The blade ended where the hatred began, buried in his heart. Lorne's body collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud, eyes frozen in a wide, lifeless stare, mouth ajar in a final, silent gasp. The steel skewer protruded from between his ribs like a flag of finality, the point buried deep in his chest, unmoving. Blood oozed beneath him, seeping along the linoleum floor of the galley, forming a dark pool that spread slowly under the flickering fluorescent light. For a moment there was no movement, no sound, no breath. Then, shallow, fragile breathing broke the silence. Malik. Silas didn't move right away. He stood over the fallen man, shoulders heaving, his right hand still trembling from the blow he had delivered. His fingers were streaked with blood, not his own, and his palm throbbed from the impact of driving the skewer upward. His eyes, still locked on Lorne's lifeless face, were dark with something that didn't belong to a businessman. Something older, something primal. A low shuffle broke the trance. Elias stepped forward, moving quickly but carefully. He knelt beside Lorne, two fingers pressing against the side of the man's neck. A beat, then nothing. He tried again, lower, firmer, his face a mask of professionalism that had been hardened through years of field work. "Gone," Elias said quietly, almost to himself. His voice didn't carry judgment, just certainty. Reddick Cole, wincing slightly, leaned against the overhead bin to steady himself. His hand clutched the cloth pressed to his shoulder wound, where the tip of the blade had grazed him moments earlier. Blood soaked the white fabric, but he ignored the pain. "We tried," he muttered, his voice hoarse with regret and frustration. He wasn't mourning Lorne, he was mourning the cost, the damage, the boy's pain, the father's sacrifice. A sudden chime rang through the speakers, followed by the captain's voice, distorted slightly by the intercom system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are making an emergency descent. Please remain seated and secure all belongings. Emergency medical teams will be awaiting us at Castleton Regional." The words echoed through the stunned silence of the cabin. Passengers remained frozen in their seats. Some held hands. Others whispered into phones or stared straight ahead, as if waking from a nightmare they had yet to process. A child somewhere in the back sniffled. A man reached up to pull the window shade down, not to block the light, but to block the reality. Silas finally looked away from Lorne and dropped to his knees beside Malik. The boy lay curled, his shoulder wrapped weakly in Elias's spare cloth. Blood soaked through it, less than before, but still too much for a father's comfort. Malik's eyes were open, flickering, unfocused. His lips moved slowly, silently. Silas cradled the back of his son's head gently, lowering his forehead until it touched Malik's. "I've got you," he whispered. His voice was steady, but only just. His fingers moved over Malik's face as if trying to reassure both the boy and himself that he was real, alive. Malik blinked slowly, then closed his eyes. His breathing steadied. Behind them, the emergency lighting flickered again as the plane began its descent. The engines hummed louder, vibrating the floor slightly. Elias moved through the cabin to ensure no further threats remained. Reddick spoke in hushed tones with the cockpit, relaying what had happened in firm, coded language. Silas didn't move from Malik's side. The passengers slowly emerged from their paralysis. Some began whispering, asking questions in low, cautious voices. Others simply stared at Silas, unsure whether to thank him, fear him, or both. One man near the front took out his phone and began to film, until Reddick raised a single hand and shook his head. The man stopped. The galley smelled of adrenaline and metal and blood. The skewer remained embedded in Lorne's chest, untouched. No one dared move it. Not yet. The moments dragged like hours. But Silas didn't speak again. He didn't look up, didn't blink, didn't shift his grip on Malik. He had done what no man should be asked to do, taken a life with his own hand. But he had done it to save one. A buzzing from the cockpit signaled final approach. Below, red and white lights dotted the runway at Castleton. Emergency vehicles lined the tarmac. Reddick finally approached Silas, crouching beside him. "They're ready outside," he said. "Stretchers are coming." Medicals prepped. Silas nodded faintly. "You did what you had to," Reddick added. Silas didn't answer. Elias returned, kneeling on the opposite side. "He'll make it," he said softly, placing a hand on Malik's back. "He's strong." Silas looked down at his son, brushing hair from his blood-specked forehead. The boy twitched slightly in his arms, mumbling something only his father could hear. Then the wheels hit the tarmac with a harsh screech and the plane bounced once, then steadied. And still, Silas held him. Held him as if letting go would unravel everything. Held him as if the truth of what had happened wouldn't come crashing down the moment he stood up. Held him because in that single act of protection, something inside him had broken. Quietly, completely. The billionaire, the builder, the father, had done what even his worst rivals could never imagine. In saving his son, he destroyed a piece of himself. As the aircraft's wheels screeched against the tarmac, the cabin shuddered under the force of the emergency landing. Oxygen masks dangled limp above the seats, and the fluorescent overhead lights buzzed faintly, as if even they were stunned by the violence that had unfolded midair. The cabin door cracked open seconds after the plane halted, and the unmistakable clamor of boots and urgency filled the entryway. Paramedics surged in first. Their vests glowed under the stark interior lighting as they moved swiftly through the narrow aisle. One crouched beside Malik, whose skin was pale under the drying blood staining his shirt. He was barely upright in his father's arms. The medic touched the boy's pulse, then gave a quick nod to his partner. "We've got a shallow cut and signs of shock," he said. Oxygen was placed gently over Malik's face, and gauze pressed firmly to his collarbone. Silas remained crouched beside him, his hands stained with blood, Lorne's and his son's, his face locked in a stillness that bordered on statue-like. But his eyes were anything but calm. They flicked between Malik and the cabin door, his mind still braced for more danger. A stretcher was brought in for Lorne, though no one rushed. He lay on his side near the galley, motionless, the metal skewer still buried in his chest. One medic checked his vitals briefly before looking away. "No pulse," he said flatly. A quiet passed through the aisle, thick and heavy. Whatever Lorne had been, angry, cruel, desperate, he was now something else entirely. The threat had ended. The damage, however, was just beginning. Seconds later, police stormed the aircraft. First came the Castleton State Troopers in dark gray uniforms, guns holstered but hands twitching. Behind them were plainclothes agents, federal responders already briefed by the cockpit after Elias's encrypted warning. One officer spotted Elias and barked, "Who's the marshal?" Elias stood slowly, pulling out his badge and ID, still smeared with a bit of blood from the scuffle. "Marshal Grant. Code confirmed. Threat neutralized." The officer nodded, then turned to Silas, who was now helping Malik to his feet. A different agent approached, eyes scanning the scene. "Mr. Dunbar?" he asked. Silas gave a silent nod and extended his hand, the bloodied weapon already wrapped in a napkin. "This belongs to evidence," he said. The agent took the blade carefully, placing it into a sealed bag. But his attention was soon drawn to the tall, silent figure near the galley, Reddick Cole, still standing like a guard post. One of the Homeland officers stepped forward cautiously. "And you?" the officer asked. Reddick reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black leather case. He flipped it open, revealing a Platinum Tier ID with a holographic seal. Reddick Cole, Executive Security Tier 6, assigned to protect Mr. Dunbar and his family. His voice was even, unwavering. The officer's face changed. Tier 6, he repeated, glancing at his partner. That's above federal clearance. Silas, finally rising fully, stepped between them. He answers to me, he said, voice low. His deployment was authorized privately through internal protocols. You'll find it all documented if you have access to those channels. The officer opened his mouth as if to argue, then paused. There were protocols even he didn't have clearance to challenge. Instead, he gave a tight nod and moved aside. Outside, the chaos had already taken a different shape. Videos from inside the plane had gone viral within minutes of touchdown. A flight attendant holding a knife to a teenager's throat, a father pleading, a passenger lunging, and a single, fatal strike that ended it all. Dozens of flashing lights painted the windows of the aircraft. News vans, camera crews, and reporters with microphones swarmed the fences of Castleton Airstrip. The world was hungry for a story, and they were about to get one. A junior officer stepped aboard, holding a clipboard. Mr. Dunbar, the press is waiting outside. Do you wish to make a statement? Silas shook his head slowly. No. My son needs a hospital and peace. He glanced over at Malik, now seated quietly on a bench near the emergency exit, the oxygen mask removed but his hand still clutching his father's. Elias approached, his expression calm but worn. You did what you had to do, he said, placing a hand on Silas's shoulder. You protected him. I know, Silas murmured, eyes fixed on his son. But I also gave the world a story it will twist. Paramedics prepared to escort Malik down the stairs to the waiting ambulance. As they opened the cabin door, cold air rushed in. Silas followed, one arm steadying Malik, the other brushing away the crowd of questions waiting on the tarmac. The officers continued their work behind them, photographs, evidence collection, interviews. Reddick remained inside, giving his official statement in clipped, clinical tones. But none of it mattered to Malik. As he leaned against his father during the descent onto the airstrip, he whispered, barely audible above the wind. You saved me, Dad. But what now? Silas looked ahead, toward the distant lights of the terminal, toward a future already rewritten. Justice may land quickly, but healing flies slower. The flash of cameras was relentless. Silas Dunbar sat alone at the long oak table, shoulders straight, jaw tight, eyes clear but heavy. The chamber of the Senate Subcommittee on Aviation Security buzzed with voices and tension. Behind him, aides shuffled papers, while in front, a panel of stone-faced lawmakers stared down at him like judges. The air was sterile, too cold, humming with fluorescent lights and quiet suspicion. One of the senators leaned forward. Mr. Dunbar, he said, adjusting his glasses, how is it that a flight attendant with no criminal record, no history of instability, and over a decade of service suddenly became a threat mid-air? You're a man of data. Give us something concrete. Silas didn't flinch. He wore a muted gray suit, clean lines, no pocket square, no theatrics. His voice was calm but firm, the kind of calm that wasn't for show. It was forged under pressure, in boardrooms, in negotiations, and, just days ago, in the aisle of a plane with a blade inches from his son's throat. He didn't snap, suddenly, Silas said, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. He was ignored repeatedly. That silence gave him space to fester. A murmur stirred the room. Another senator, a younger man, skeptical, raised a printed file. Yet, here, in the records from Nordic Air, we find nothing. No red flags, no write-ups, just glowing reviews. So are you suggesting there was a coordinated cover-up? That the airline knew and did nothing? Silas's eyes narrowed. He knew this game, the attempt to redirect the narrative, to make accountability look like paranoia. He reached into his folder and placed 2 stapled documents on the desk. These are testimonies, he said, sliding them forward. 2 passengers. Both submitted formal complaints about Lorne Calder, one in 2021, the other just 7 months ago. Neither was followed up. I had my legal team track them down. The committee aides rushed forward, collecting the papers. They both described similar behavior, Silas continued, his voice tightening with quiet frustration. Condescension, intimidation, racial undertones in language, But those complaints never made it past the shift supervisor. You want to know why no record exists? Because some records were never meant to survive. The lead senator leaned back in his chair, lips pursed. The room went quiet. A storm was forming behind the walls of bureaucracy. Silas knew his words were a risk. Public hearings were rarely about truth. They were about optics. But this wasn't just a personal crusade. It was a reckoning. Outside the chamber, in the wider world, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Social media feeds pulsed with images from the incident, screenshots of Silas holding Malik, bloodied and trembling, the frozen moment where the blade was disarmed, and the exact frame when Lorne Calder collapsed with steel in his chest. The videos had been viewed millions of times, hashtags trended, talk shows debated. But inside Silas's home, far from the noise, the recovery was quiet. Malik had refused all interview requests. News anchors begged for a soundbite. Producers offered donations to Veltranix's foundation in exchange for exclusives. Silas turned them all down. His son had earned peace, not publicity. Malik stayed mostly in his room, wrapped in a hoodie 2 sizes too large, headphones over his ears. His sketchbook never left his lap. He didn't speak much, not because he couldn't, but because he was processing something far too large for words. Silas knocked before entering, every time. "Hey," he said one evening, setting a plate of fruit on the desk. "You eat today." Malik gave a small nod. Silas sat beside him, watching as the pencil traced lines across paper. A lion, massive, thick-maned, standing against wind and lightning. At its feet, a smaller figure curled in sleep. "That's you," Malik murmured, eyes still on the drawing. Silas blinked. "The lion?" Malik nodded. "Blocking the storm." The words struck deeper than Silas expected. He reached out and gently squeezed Malik's shoulder. No more needed to be said. Meanwhile, things were stirring beyond the Dunbar's door. Calls began flooding the Senate offices. Activists, civic groups, and private citizens demanded legislative action. Journalists dug into Nordic Air's internal files. A whistleblower, anonymous for now, leaked screenshots of internal memos showing that Lorne's prior incidents had been flagged, but supervisors were instructed to handle in-house. That same memo used coded language. Avoid escalation. No formal documentation unless unavoidable. A name began circulating. The Malik Law. Proposed legislation requiring all flight crew, regardless of tenure, to undergo psychological evaluations every 6 months. Background checks, mental health screenings, behavior assessments, a push for accountability in skies once considered untouchable. Some called it overreach, but more called it overdue. Silas stood at the heart of it all. Interviews declined, reporters deflected. He wasn't trying to build a movement, but a movement had found him anyway. He met quietly with lawmakers behind closed doors, offering strategy, testimony, and a firm reminder that reform wasn't about punishment, it was about prevention. And still every evening, no matter the chaos of the day, he returned home. He sat at the edge of Malik's bed, sometimes in silence, sometimes telling stories from his own childhood. Nights were hardest. He rarely slept through them. When he closed his eyes, the blade returned. The glint, the trembling breath, the blood. He would sit awake sometimes, hand clenched, the memory too vivid. Sometimes, he whispered to himself in the dark, peace is bought with memory you can't put down. A month later, Silas stepped onto the plane with quiet precision, his hand resting gently on Malik's shoulder as they walked down the jet bridge. There were no cameras flashing this time, no reporters waiting to capture his first flight since the incident. Only silence and the soft hum of a boarding announcement overhead. The atmosphere inside the plane was bright but subdued, the late morning sun casting long golden streaks across the rows of leather seats. Passengers moved with the quiet choreography of early travel, storing bags and settling into their places. But Silas's eyes scanned everything, the overhead compartments, the crew, the faces, not with fear, just focus. He hadn't forgotten. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Dunbar," said a young black flight attendant near the entrance. His voice was calm, respectful, and steady. "We've got your seats prepared." Silas met the man's eyes for a long second. He nodded once. "Thank you." His voice was soft, but strong, not defensive, not guarded, just aware. Malik followed, his steps light but careful, his sketchbook clutched against his chest. He wore a dark red hoodie now, the kind he said made him feel less noticed. But Silas noticed everything, the way his son glanced toward the galley, the way his shoulders hunched just slightly whenever a uniformed crew member passed. They found their seats, window and aisle, first row of the cabin. Silas helped Malik with his backpack, then sat down and took a slow breath. The leather felt cold under his palm. The silence between father and son stretched for a moment, heavy with memories they didn't speak about. "You okay?" Malik asked, his voice soft as he buckled in. Silas turned to him. His lips curved into a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I am now," he said, and reached over to squeeze Malik's hand. The engines rumbled beneath them, a familiar vibration that once brought comfort but now carried weight. Silas let his gaze drift to the small plaque mounted discreetly above the emergency instructions near the exit door. It read, "In honor of Malik Dunbar, whose courage helped us change." The airline had created a scholarship in his name, a quiet attempt to make things right. Silas had approved it, but insisted on no press. He didn't want headlines. He wanted systems fixed before stories needed to be told. As the plane taxied and lifted into the sky, Silas watched Malik lean into the window, sketchbook open again. Pencil lines formed quickly, bold at first, then slower, more precise. A lion's mane began to take shape. Flight attendants moved down the aisle. Not Lorne, never again. These men were different. Trained, aware, cautious but not cold. One of them, a man in his 40s with a weathered but kind face, paused near Silas and gave a nod. Not forced, not performative. Just a gesture of acknowledgement. Silas returned it, wordlessly. He closed his eyes for a moment, only to open them again when a bump of turbulence rolled through the cabin. Instinctively, he reached across the seat to steady Malik. The boy didn't flinch this time. He just smiled faintly and kept drawing. Silas turned his face toward the window now, the clouds bright against the glass. The last time they had flown together, the sky had felt like a trap. Today, it felt different. Still fragile, still uncertain, but not poisoned. His mind drifted to the programs quietly funded in the aftermath: pilot screenings, behavioral training, anonymous reporting channels within airlines. He hadn't announced them. He just made them happen. They were part of the new chapter. Silent, like the steps he now took every day, each one part of a larger plan to fix what others had ignored. A young man 2 rows ahead shifted in his seat, revealing a flash of a newspaper tucked in the seat pocket. The headline read, "Airline Reform. What Comes After Survival?" Silas didn't look away. He just noted it and let it pass. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane climbed toward cruising altitude. Malik leaned gently against his father's side, eyes beginning to drift closed. Silas looked down at him, the boy's head against his shoulder, the sketchbook sliding toward his lap. On the page, the lion was complete, surrounded by a storm of clouds that broke around its body, untouched. Silas exhaled slowly. No blades, no rage, just quiet, just motion. And somewhere, deep within him, a small piece of peace began to take root. He closed his eyes again, not in exhaustion, but in release. And what he saw behind them was not the galley, not the blood, not the knife. He saw his son, safe, sketching lions. Some battles scar the skin. Others carve strength into the soul. Moments later, the tables turned. The same blade he raised in anger pierced his own fate. If you stand for protecting the innocent and demanding accountability, subscribe now. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of racism, hatred, and the abuse of authority, showing how quickly prejudice can escalate into violence and destruction. Its purpose is to raise awareness, challenge systemic injustice, and inspire empathy, accountability, and a commitment to ending discrimination.